Last year, my Yom Kippur sermon was titled, Choosing Life by Confronting Death, the Joy and Blessing of Yom Kippur. I spoke about the ways that Yom Kippur invites us to let go for 24 hours of this our grasp on this physical existence, in order to come face to face with the precarious nature of our existence, so that we can embrace more fully and more honestly the miracle of being alive. I cited this morning's Yom Kippur Torah reading, the verses we just heard chanted, enjoining us to choose life. I quoted my teacher, Rav Yitz Greenberg, who had spoken to our Massachusetts Board of Rabbis during the pandemic in June of 2020. And I described him telling us during that death-filled, scary time that throughout our history, Jews have responded to the brush with death by reaffirming and renewing life, strengthening love and celebration. This, Rav Yitz said, is the classic Jewish response to death. None of us could have imagined the 12 days after I delivered that sermon last year, as we concluded our High Holy Day season with our festive Simchat Torah celebration the night of October 6th, dancing with joy and pride on Beacon Street, holding our Torah scrolls. None of us could have imagined that only hours remained before the Jewish people's brush with death became a full, ungraspable encounter with death on a scale that our people had not experienced since the Holocaust. The Torah reading this morning gives us what Rav Yitz calls Moses' elevator pitch of the meaning of the Torah. Behold, I place before you today life and good and death and evil. I call on heaven and earth to witness to you that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life. There's a popular saying right now in Israel referencing the massacre at the Nova Festival, where over 300 young people were murdered while celebrating life through music and dance. The saying is, we will dance again. How will we dance again? How have we as a people, even during this past unimaginable year, begun again to dance? What does it mean in this new world that we've inhabited since October 7th to choose life? During my trips to Israel in November and February this past year, I witnessed countless examples of what it means to choose life in this new world. Another thing I couldn't have imagined a year ago is that I would make 2 trips to Israel during this horrific war, to bring love and support, to volunteer, and to learn with that same teacher, Rav Yitz Greenberg, as he had invited a group of 9 rabbis from North America to workshop his magnum opus, just now published, titled The Triumph of Life. Rav Greenberg had been working on this book long before October 7th, 2023. And now, as we gathered in Jerusalem last February to discuss this critical aspect of Jewish theology, loving and celebrating life, despite, we could see this being lived every day. Back in November, I saw firsthand the way that Israeli society, everyone, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, truly all of Israeli society, seemed to have mobilized immediately and created an entire infrastructure to meet the multiple and overwhelming needs, physical and emotional, that emerged on October 7th. Overnight, truly overnight, a civilian command center was established in many towns and cities across Israel. This was not with government involvement, all civilian run. We visited the one in Jerusalem, which served as a place to collect donated items such as food and clothing, supplies for civilians and for soldiers, a place for people to give what they could give and take what they needed. On our trip, we brought donations from the U.S., and we went to an enormous makeshift warehouse inside of what had been a school for the arts in the middle of Jerusalem. There, volunteers from Israel, but also from around the world, and not all of them Jewish, were receiving and sorting an abundance of donations. I met a man who had come from Seattle simply because he had the time and resources to do so and wanted to help in some way. We traveled to the Dead Sea region in the south of Israel, where hotels now housed thousands of displaced people from the communities located close to Gaza, including kibbutzim and moshavim, all kinds of communities, 32 in all, which had been attacked, badly damaged, and many destroyed. I met people from across Israel who had backgrounds in education or social work, who had come together to create makeshift schools to school the displaced children. Not just one school, a nursery school, an elementary school, a middle school, a high school. Multiple schools were built at Masada, where, show of hands, how many of you have visited that site in Israel, right? So imagine the visitor center, but now it's a school, a fully running middle school. And elsewhere on in that place, there were the other schools up and running, and this was just one of many across the country. Volunteers had dropped everything to help these many thousands of displaced people, to help give some normalcy to these children. I sat and talked with 4 middle school girls who were from one of the kibbutzim, Kibbutz Sad, and they excitedly told me that one of them was to celebrate her bat mitzvah shortly after October 7th. But of course, they had to flee the kibbutz with none of their belongings. The manager and the staff of the hotel they were now staying in had made it possible for her to have her service and her party on site. So they danced as planned. We visited one of the hospitals in Jerusalem where wounded soldiers were receiving visits from strangers, including our group. There were so many people who had come just to bring their presence. Families of soldiers, many of these soldiers were reservists, were older. They had families and jobs, and these families were immediately receiving deliveries of meals and supportive visits. And in the many months of devastating losses, several groups have been created simply for more people to show up and be present for bereaved families or families who have people serving in the reserves. On one Facebook group dedicated to volunteer opportunities, which I follow, honestly, partly because I plan to go back and volunteer when I can, but also I follow it as a source of inspiration. It's a group just dedicated to publicizing volunteer opportunities and needs, and people from all over the world, from all kinds of backgrounds, are a part of it. So I saw this post just the other day. A hug and a gift, an initiative all about connecting and embracing bereaved families. Volunteers needed all over the country. Another post said, yesterday I woke up to sirens in Tel Aviv, as all of Israel has done for the past year. After the bomb shelter, I got in the car and headed down to Shuva Junction in the Gaza envelope, where Lillian and her 2 sons have been serving food for soldiers since October 8th last year. This has been a year of suffering for the Jewish people, directly or indirectly. We are all just a couple of degrees of separation from people directly impacted by October 7th and the ensuing war, because our Jewish people comprise only 0.2% of the world's population. If anyone asks you if you have family in Israel, you do. Fully half of the Jewish people live there. I know and I so honor that there are many points of view here in this room and among our people regarding the way that the war has unfolded and what should happen next. There is so much despair and outrage all around, whether it is outrage at Israel's government and extremists, which is felt by so many, both here and in Israel, the horrific anti-Semitism that has risen its ugly head worldwide in this past year, the upholding of terrorists as freedom fighters, the mourning of terrorist leaders, even who are responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans, the refusal to unite to free the remaining hostages, the refusal to unite and free all of us from extremist terror, to truly free Palestine, to free Israel, to free the Lebanese people, the Iranian people from extremism. There is so much outrage and there is so much despair. Despair at the refusal of so many to recognize Israel's right, like any country, to defend itself against this attack and so many more that its perpetrators have promised. And the horror that we feel at the deaths of thousands of innocent people in Gaza and Lebanon, each one created in the image of God. These feelings, all of them enormous and all of them valid, about the 101 hostages still in captivity, about our family in Israel running to bomb shelters frequently and tens of thousands displaced from their homes in the north and the south, about the trauma of all those directly affected on October 7th. All of those families, each a universe of universes, so many broken hearts, so much loss. So what does it mean to choose life in the face of so much death? I look with awe at Rachel Goldberg and John Polin, parents of American-Israeli Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing. For those who aren't familiar with Hirsch and his story, he has many ties to the Boston area. His aunt lives here, and he served on staff at Gann Academy for our local Jewish high school for their trip to Israel in the summer of 2023, making strong connections with the students and very much beloved. His parents, Rachel and John, over this year had become the face of the hundreds of families of hostages, doing absolutely everything humanly possible to try to secure their release. And they were just the other day interviewed. After fighting every moment of every day to bring their son home, only to have him be murdered at point-blank range along with 5 other hostages when they were only days from rescue, and just after a negotiation had been turned down. These parents could have easily chosen to turn inward into their own depths of trauma and grief. But just weeks after Hirsch's murder, after 11 months in hell, Rachel said this: "People in power," meaning those who had made decisions to use force rather than negotiations to bring the hostages home, people who had not done what they needed to do, those people, she said, they tried to come to Shiva, and I said, please don't come. I don't want you here. Don't come and ask me for forgiveness for your sin. Real teshuvah is when you find yourself in the exact situation when you did what you know was wrong and you choose differently. You have 101 chances now. Do it. And that's the teshuvah. End quote. Rachel and John still wear a piece of masking tape numbering the days since the hostages were stolen from their lives, even though their son won't be among those who can come home now. Rachel and John continue to fight for the freedom, for the life of those who are still in captivity. They are choosing life in the face of the greatest trauma and loss anyone can know. What they are showing us is exactly what we are commanded to do in this morning's Torah portion. To choose life is to live beyond yourself, understanding that you are bound up with others who share this world with you, and that you are responsible to those who will come after you. We read in this morning's Torah portion, I make this covenant with its sanctions, not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here with us this day before God and those who are not with us this day. Built into the commandment to choose life is the fact that we who are partners in this covenant are to choose life not for ourselves alone, but for others too. Those we know, those we don't know, those not even yet born. Moses, knowing he would soon die, could have turned inward and focused on death. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs taught that instead, Moses imparted this central sacred obligation to choose life. Rachel Goldberg and John Polin, like Moses, are exemplars of living beyond the self. Our tradition emphasizes not only that we must live beyond the self, but that we always have the possibility of transformation within the self and within the world. In the Talmud, we read a sage, Rabbi Abahu, who imagined that God created and destroyed multiple worlds before creating this one that we now inhabit. My friend Rabbi Shai Held writes of this. Commenting on this midrash, Rav Joseph Soloveitchik strikingly observes that here we have God not only creating, as in the biblical text, but also recreating, rebuilding after destruction. And the way God is portrayed here is meant to teach us a profound ethical and spiritual lesson. As God creates and recreates, so too should human beings be ready to rebuild and reconstruct even as previous structures collapse. This is not easy, Soloveitchik admits. To build initially is difficult, but to rebuild is even more challenging. And faced with destruction and devastation, we are nevertheless bidden to start over again with faith and resourcefulness as God did. This then is what the Torah requires of us, to act, to create, and when necessary, to recreate, even as did the divine creator. End quote. To be tasked with being God's partner, in other words, is not simply to be presented with raw materials and told to build. It is, as Rabbi Held wrote, some of the time to be confronted by horrible loss, by confusion about the past and uncertainty about the future, by the temptation to succumb to despair and fatigue, and to somehow manage to choose life instead. So I have an invitation, a little bit of homework for you. This afternoon, through the rest of Yom Kippur, if you have a moment to discuss with a friend, a loved one, or someone you don't know yet that you introduce yourself to here in this community, to discuss with each other, what does it mean for you to choose life now, this year? There's a saying as we come to the new year, end the year and its curses, begin the year and its blessings. May we choose the path of blessing, showing up for ourselves and for each other and for the future. I'm going to end with a poem. I wrote it after learning of the murder of the 6 hostages at the very end of August. It's called Elegy, September 1st. I couldn't find the chet, the Hebrew letter, the beginning of life, on my keyboard that I was using as a life raft to float down the river of tears, reaching out to the others in their own rafts as we were carried down a rushing river of grief beyond imagining. Our cries and the crash of the water, somehow each amplifying the other rather than drowning each other out. Before the news, before the river, I daydreamed, Rachel's hand cradling the newly born head of her son, Hirsch. The power of the love in that new connection inhabits eternity, and no matter the cruelty, the heartless desecration of life and love, that power outlives us all. That power is inside the rushing river of the tears of Am Yisrael, It will carry us as it always has. We will reach tomorrow by reaching out from our life rafts, from our keyboards, from our cameras on our phones as we call to cradle each other's tear-stained faces. The dove will see a rainbow. There will be a day after this endless day of devastation that has lasted nearly 11 months, a Kaddish year. There will be a new world built on living waters, made of tears and love. There is a stillness at the center of the life force, the waters, a place where they are with us still, where we cradle them and comfort them, that their lives, their suffering, their deaths will not be in vain. From this place of stillness, we will row back out into the waters. We will find each other and carry each other into each next breath, even when breathing seems impossible. We will see our ancestors' reflections in the water that surrounds us and carries us. We will see in the rainbow the faces stolen from this world, and we will not break our promise to see the promise held within it, that a new world is possible, that out of utter devastation, we can create, we can live again. May we choose life. May we be written and sealed in the book of life.